Not because you tried to be, not because you played a game, but because you finally communicated something. Most people are terrified to say, I am not available for anything less than respect. This is the boundary that makes him miss you every day, the one standard that shifts the entire psychological dynamic. It's the line that separates the woman who is replaceable from the woman who becomes a loss he can't escape. And that boundary is simple. You do not participate in connections where effort is inconsistent, affection is conditional, or presence is convenient. You don't fight for attention. You don't negotiate for the bare minimum. You don't entertain emotional crumbs just to feel chosen for a moment. The reason this boundary is so powerful is because it requires something rare. The willingness to walk away from anything that asks you to shrink. Most people cling to situations that hurt them because they're terrified of emptiness. But the truth is this, emptiness is far less painful than self-betrayal. And when you choose self-respect over anxiety, you create a space a man cannot ignore. He feels your absence like a pressure. He feels the silence like a mirror. He feels the shift because you stopped making him the center of your emotional life. This is where the psychology kicks in. Human beings value what is not guaranteed. We pursue what grounds us, challenges us, and reflects our best potential. We miss what we cannot easily access. When you enforce this boundary, you remove yourself from the realm of convenience. You are no longer the woman who waits, who over-explains, who tolerates half-hearted behavior. You become the woman who says, if you want me in your life, show up like it matters. And suddenly he feels the gap your absence creates. Not because you're punishing him, not because you're withholding affection, but because you've stopped enabling his excuses. The truth is, most men don't realize the value of a woman until she stops cushioning their comfort, until the quick replies stop, until the constant availability stops, until the emotional labor stops, until you pull your energy back and place it on the one person you can actually control, yourself. This is the moment he feels the difference. Understand something critical. A man does not miss the woman who chases him. He misses the woman who had a life before him, a life beyond him, and a life she returns to when he shows inconsistency. When you enforce this boundary, the attraction rewires. He realizes that your attention was a privilege. He realizes that your softness was earned, not owed. He realizes that he cannot treat you casually and expect intimacy in return. This is not manipulation. This is alignment. You are aligning your standards with your behavior. And when your behavior matches your worth, the world responds with new respect or it removes itself. Either way, you win. The powerful part is this. Enforcing this boundary doesn't require anger. It doesn't require drama. It doesn't require threats. It requires calm clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from knowing who you are and what you deserve. You say nothing dramatic. You simply stop participating in conversations that exhaust you. You step back from people who don't step forward. You give your time where effort is consistent. You keep your peace where respect is mutual. He begins to wonder why. He begins to analyze. He begins to think about the moments you were there and now you're not. This is how missing begins. Not when you disappear emotionally, but when you reappear in your own life. When you choose purpose over panic. When you choose self-focus over self-abandonment. When you choose standards over longing. Your strength becomes undeniable. There's a profound attractiveness in someone who refuses to settle. Someone who refuses to be molded by another's inconsistency. Someone who shows that love does not require losing yourself. If he wants to keep you, he adapts. If he doesn't, you lose nothing because you never compromise your value for temporary presence. This boundary is not a trick. It's not a strategy. It's not a test. It is a declaration that you will not be an emotional placeholder, a declaration that your heart is not a convenience, a declaration that your standards are not negotiable. And here's the truth. When a woman carries herself with that kind of inner certainty, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she tries to be, but because a man remembers the woman who respected herself enough to walk away from anything that didn't align with her worth. That is the boundary that makes him miss you every single day. It doesn't shut people out. It doesn't punish anyone. It simply reveals the truth. How you expect to be treated, how you expect to be spoken to, how you expect to be loved. People misunderstand boundaries because they confuse them with emotional distance. But distance is what you create when there are no boundaries, because that's when resentment grows, when self-respect erodes, when you start shrinking just to keep someone close. A boundary is the opposite of fear. It is the expression of a person who has finally decided to stop negotiating their worth. It is the moment you take responsibility for the energy you allow into your life. And the moment you draw it, everything in your world shifts. Your relationships change, your silence becomes stronger, and the people who once took advantage of your softness suddenly feel the loss of your access. Most people go through life silently hoping others will understand their pain, their limits, their breaking points. But hoping is not clarity. Hoping is not communication. Hoping is not protection. A boundary is clarity embodied. It is the courage to say, I matter too. It is the courage to say, I will not abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. It is the courage to say, if you continue to cross this line, I will remove myself not because I don't care, but because I care about myself too. And that level of self-honesty transforms everything. When you finally set a boundary, you learn something powerful. The people who truly care about you will adjust, not attack. They will listen, not blame. They will grow with you, not guilt you. But those who benefited from your lack of boundaries, those who counted on your silence, your tolerance, your it's okay, I understand, they will resist. They will call you difficult. They will say you've changed. They will say you're overreacting. And yet their discomfort is not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you're breaking a pattern that kept you small. A boundary exposes the truth about relationships. It reveals who values your presence and who values your compliance. It shows who respects your time and who just expects it. It highlights who sees you as a partner and who sees you as an emotional convenience. And yes, it is uncomfortable to witness this truth, but it is far more painful to keep living in relationships built on self-sacrifice. The moment you enforce a boundary, you reclaim the one thing most people spend their lives unconsciously giving away: your agency. You stop waiting for someone to wake up and treat you better. You stop hoping their inconsistency will magically transform. Instead, you take back the steering wheel of your emotional life. You decide that the pattern ends with you. And for the first time, you step into a world where your presence has weight, where your voice has power, where your needs are no longer optional. Setting a boundary is not about controlling others, it's about controlling what you allow. You cannot force respect, but you can refuse disrespect. You cannot demand effort, but you can remove yourself from situations where effort is absent. You cannot make someone love you deeper, but you can walk away from shallow connections. You cannot change someone's behavior, but you can change your access to it. This is why boundaries feel so powerful. They turn your values into behavior. They turn your self-worth into action. They turn your emotional wounds into wisdom. You stop explaining everything. You stop apologizing for wanting basic respect. You stop shrinking your needs so someone else won't feel pressured. Instead, you start honoring the truth that has always been inside you. Your heart is not a bargain item. When you live with boundaries, you stop being afraid of losing people. You start being afraid of losing yourself. You start choosing inner peace over outer validation. You start choosing alignment over attachment. You start choosing clarity over chaos. And that shift is what makes you magnetic. People feel the difference when you respect yourself. They feel the strength in your silence, the certainty in your presence, the depth in your standards. Suddenly, the ones who took you for granted want your attention. The ones who dismissed your needs want your reassurance. The ones who treated you casually feel the sting of your absence. This is the psychology of value. People don't miss the person who was always available. They miss the person who knew how to walk away the moment they were being diminished. A boundary teaches others how to treat you, but more importantly, it teaches you how to treat yourself. It becomes a lighthouse in your life, a guiding structure that protects you from emotional storms, from toxic patterns, from silent suffering. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to give without being drained, to stay open without being exploited. And the moment you realize that boundaries are a form of self-love, not punishment, not manipulation, not coldness, you begin to see your relationships with new clarity. You begin to choose people who value your standards instead of resenting them. You begin to build connections rooted in mutual respect, not fear of abandonment. You begin to create a life where you don't have to sacrifice your identity to be loved. That is the real power of a boundary. Not the line you draw for others, but the truth you finally draw for yourself. When you choose daily, unwavering self-respect, you create a pattern that the world cannot ignore. People learn how to treat you, not because you lecture them, not because you threaten them, but because your behavior becomes a clear message. You are no longer someone who bends whenever someone applies pressure. You are no longer someone who forgives the same disrespect over and over. You are no longer someone who trades peace for proximity. Instead, you become someone whose standards are visible, steady, and unmistakable. And that consistency builds a kind of power that changes every relationship you enter. Most people want good treatment, but they tolerate the opposite. They crave loyalty, but they reward inconsistency. They want effort, but they accept excuses. And then they feel confused when they're hurt again. But pain doesn't come from what people do, it comes from what you allow repeatedly. The moment you become consistent in self-respect, you remove the confusion. You make the consequences predictable. If someone shows up with honesty and effort, they get access. If someone shows up with manipulation or indifference, they lose access. It becomes that simple. And this simplicity is what makes self-respect so powerful. Every time you lower your standards for the sake of keeping someone close, you teach them that your boundaries are flexible. You teach them that your silence is permission. You teach them that your forgiveness is automatic. You teach them that your love can be earned without effort. But when you become consistent, when you hold the same line every time, suddenly the dynamic changes. People realize that your heart is not a convenience. They realize your time is not disposable. They realize you cannot be kept with crumbs. Consistency makes your presence valuable because it becomes rare. Think of it like this. A person who respects themselves never reacts out of desperation. They don't beg for clarity. They don't chase someone who is walking away. They don't prove their worth to someone who doesn't care to see it. Instead, they remain anchored in their own principles. They remain loyal to their own truth. They remain committed to their own peace. That commitment creates emotional gravity. It pulls the right people closer and pushes the wrong people out. This is the predictable consequence of self-respect. You lose what was weak, but you gain what was strong. People will test you intentionally or unconsciously. They will see how much they can get away with, how little they can give, how far they can push, not because they're malicious, but because human nature gravitates toward ease. But when you respond the same way every time, with clarity, not anger, with boundaries, not guilt, with composure, not chaos, you send a message that cannot be misunderstood. You are not someone who collapses under emotional pressure. Consistency also reveals character. When your standards remain firm, you expose the people who only wanted you because you were easy to take advantage of. These are the ones who leave when you stop shrinking. And let them. Because what leaves when you choose self-respect was never real, never stable, never meant to stay. What remains is what values your presence, cherishes your energy, and respects your identity. The truth is simple. People take you as seriously as you take yourself. If you're consistent, they're careful. If you're inconsistent, they become careless. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask for validation. It simply exists as a steady force. It is felt in how you walk away from disrespect without trembling. It is seen in how you don't repeat yourself more than once. It is shown in how you choose peace over drama. It is expressed in how you invest time in people who reciprocate, not in those who drain you. Predictable consequences also include something deeper. Your life becomes less chaotic. Drama only thrives in inconsistency. Emotional confusion only grows where boundaries bend. Anxiety only expands when you contradict your own values. But when your standards remain stable, the noise around you begins to quiet. You stop attracting chaos. You stop feeding insecurity. You stop repeating the same painful cycles. Why? Because you are no longer available for environments that threaten your peace. Consistency in self-respect also means consistency in self-care. You prioritize your mental state. You invest in your growth. You honor your time. You recognize when your energy is being wasted. You stop begging people to meet needs they never intended to meet. You stop hoping someone will change. Instead, you change your choices. And when your choices change, the consequences change. People begin to treat you with caution, real, healthy caution. They think before they speak. They show up when they say they will. They apologize when they are wrong. They give effort because they know effort is the only way to keep someone like you. You're not intimidating, you're respected. You're not demanding, you're clear. You're not cold, you're principled. And those principles make you powerful. Consistency and self-respect builds a reputation of someone who does not settle, someone who does not break under pressure, someone who does not hand out second chances like free samples, someone who loves deeply but never at the cost of themselves. When you live with that kind of certainty, the world responds differently. People think twice before crossing your lines. They value your presence. They feel the weight of losing you. And they understand quickly that if they bring chaos, the consequence is losing access to you. That is the predictable power of self-respect. It teaches the world how to treat you, and it teaches you to never lower your value for anyone again. Distance is not power when it's born from panic, fear, or frustration. Emotional distance is impulsive. It's a reaction to feeling ignored, hurt, or overwhelmed. It's the type of distance that tries to provoke a response, tries to be noticed, tries to be validated. But that kind of distance collapses quickly because it isn't grounded in strength, it's grounded in pain. Real power comes only from distance that is deliberate, calm, and intentional. Distance that comes from clarity, not chaos. Distance that says, I'm choosing myself, not running from you. Disciplined distance is a decision, not a tantrum. It's not about making someone miss you. It's about reclaiming your center. It's the space you create when you realize that staying emotionally available to someone who shows up inconsistently only drains your self-respect. It's the moment you understand that access to you is not automatic, it must be earned. This distance doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't threaten, it simply steps back with dignity. The psychology behind disciplined distance is incredibly strong. People can ignore emotional distance because it's unstable. They sense you'll come back the moment they offer a little attention. But disciplined distance is different. It's stable. It doesn't break when someone takes too long to reply. It doesn't collapse when anxiety grows. It doesn't chase when insecurity whispers. Disciplined distance holds firm because it is rooted in self-worth, not emotional reactivity. This is why it hits deeper. When someone realizes that your distance is not a game, not a strategy, not a cry for attention, but a grounded decision, they feel the shift. They feel the weight of your absence. They feel the loss of your warmth, your consistency, your emotional generosity. Because this time, you're not stepping away to be chased. You're stepping away because you don't entertain half effort anymore. This is where power begins to work in silence. You start investing in your own growth. You give time to your goals, your peace, your self-improvement. You redirect your energy from the uncertainty of do they want me into the clarity of what do I want. And suddenly, distance becomes transformation, not punishment, transformation. You become harder to replace because you're living a life that doesn't wait for someone to value you. You value yourself first. Disciplined distance also reveals something crucial: how people respond when they no longer have unlimited access to you. Some will panic because they relied on your emotional availability to feed their comfort. Others will remain indifferent because they never intended to invest. But the right ones, the ones who respect you, will step forward. They will make effort. They will try. They will notice the shift and rise to meet you. That clarity is priceless. Emotional distance blurs your vision. Disciplined distance sharpens it. When you pull back emotionally, you do it because you're hurt, but hurt clouds your judgment. When you pull back intentionally, you do it from self-awareness, not pain. You become more patient, more logical, more observant. You see patterns clearly. You see effort honestly. You see truth without the fog of attachment. This discipline also protects your identity. When you step back emotionally, you often feel guilt, fear, or pressure to return. But when you step back from strength, there is no guilt. There is no fear. There is only alignment. You're not cutting someone off. You're cutting off behaviors that drain you. You're not ending connection. You're ending self-neglect. You're not withholding love. You're withholding access until respect is present. And that difference changes everything. Distance becomes powerful because it interrupts the pattern. When someone is used to your instant replies, your emotional availability, your constant understanding, your unconditional patience, your shift becomes a shock to their system. They feel the tension of your boundaries. They feel the consequences of their inconsistency. They feel the reality that you're no longer playing a role in their comfort. But disciplined distance isn't cold. It isn't cruel. It isn't manipulative. It is mature. It is intentional. It is protective. You're not punishing anyone. You're preserving yourself. You're not disappearing. You're recalibrating. You're not seeking attention. You're seeking alignment. And in this space you create, you begin to rise. You begin to listen to yourself more. You begin to reconnect with your strength. You begin to build confidence that comes from within, not from external validation. And that confidence becomes visible. People sense it in your energy. They notice it in your actions. They feel it in your presence. Distance becomes powerful not because you're gone, but because you're growing. And that growth is what makes your absence echo. It becomes clear that your peace is not negotiable, that your standards are not flexible, that your heart is not an open door policy, that your life does not stop for anyone's inconsistency. People miss what they can't easily access. They desire what is stable, not desperate. They respect what respects itself. And that is the predictable outcome of disciplined distance. It makes the right people step up and the wrong people step out. Most importantly, it makes you rise into your strongest self. The version of you that no longer seeks reassurance from instability, but finds strength in your own clarity, your own discipline, your own self-respect. That is the distance that commands respect. That is the distance that cannot be ignored. That is the distance that becomes power. People don't miss what was easy, predictable, or endlessly available. They miss what challenged them to rise. They miss what required effort. They miss what had boundaries, consistency, and emotional dignity. When your presence came with standards, when you didn't settle, didn't chase, didn't accept half-hearted gestures, your absence suddenly carries weight. It exposes everything someone took for granted. It reveals the value they overlooked. And that's why it hits deeper. Because losing a woman who respected herself feels different from losing a woman who tolerated everything. Your presence with standards is unforgettable because it holds people accountable without saying a word. You didn't have to convince anyone to treat you right. You didn't have to beg to be seen. You didn't have to negotiate your worth. Your energy alone sent a message. The way you spoke, the way you carried yourself, the way you refused to settle for crumbs. People either leveled up or they lost access. And that's what made your presence powerful. Not loudness, not attitude, not threats, but clarity. Clarity is magnetic. Standards are magnetic. Boundaries are magnetic. Not because they manipulate, but because they reflect self-worth. And when someone is used to effortless attention from others, meeting a woman who knows her own value becomes a shock to their system. They feel challenged, intrigued, awakened. For the first time, they realize that intimacy is not something to be taken lightly, that access is not guaranteed, that connection requires responsibility. This is why your absence hits differently. When you leave, you don't leave chaos. You leave a standard. You leave a memory of how it felt to be respected by someone who respected herself. You leave the echo of a woman who wasn't afraid to walk away. And that echo is haunting. He remembers how you carried yourself not needy, not clingy, not desperate, but grounded. He remembers how you didn't collapse when he pulled back, how you didn't justify his inconsistency, how you didn't compete for his attention. You simply matched the energy he gave and protected your peace. This is the kind of behavior that rewires a person. It forces them to look inward. It forces them to question their choices. It forces them to confront the truth they didn't want to face. They lost someone who didn't need them, but chose them. Men do not miss emotional dependence. They miss emotional dignity. They miss the woman who held herself to a higher standard. The woman who was rare because she didn't negotiate her worth. The woman who valued herself enough to walk away instead of waiting to be chosen. And now, in your absence, he feels what he never felt when you were there, loss. Not because you're gone, but because of who you were when you were present. Presence with standards creates emotional contrast. When you step away, he compares. When you're gone, he notices. When the silence grows, the truth becomes loud. He realizes other people don't speak with your depth. Other women don't move with your calm confidence. Other connections don't feel like your emotional clarity. And it's not because you were trying to be special. It's because you were authentic. You were principled. You were consistent. Standards build identity. Identity builds gravity. Gravity builds memory. Your absence hits deeper because your presence had gravity. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't desperate. It was solid. It was steady. It was disciplined. You didn't accept apologies without changed behavior. You didn't give your heart to someone who only gave you half their effort. You didn't fight for someone who wasn't fighting for you. You didn't fall apart just because someone was unsure about you. This is what makes a person unforgettable. People forget the ones who shrink to fit. They remember the ones who stand tall, even when it costs them connection. People forget the ones who chase. They remember the ones who step back with dignity. People forget the ones who tolerate too much. They remember the ones who walk away when respect disappears. Presence with standards creates emotional consequences. Absence with dignity creates emotional impact. The moment you leave, everything you stood for becomes clear. Your silence becomes truth. Your distance becomes clarity. Your absence becomes a lesson. And here's the deepest part. He doesn't miss you because you're gone. He misses the version of himself he could have become if he rose to meet you. Your absence hits deeper when your presence had standards because you didn't suppress your worth for anyone. You didn't dilute your identity to be loved. You didn't settle for potential. You lived in truth. And people always miss the truth, especially when they failed to honor it. That is the quiet power of a woman with standards. She is unforgettable, not because she demands it, but because she embodies it.